Well, you need the Messiah.
Okay.
You need the Messiah. That's what I'm saying. That's really comes down to that. You need the Messiah. And I think on that day, that you'll find out that Messiah is Jesus. But one thing we know, I think you agree on, that whoever the Messiah is, you need him.
I don't agree with that, by the way. I don't think the Torah pushes that idea. For sure, mystical Judaism has run with that. I think that the Torah tells us to keep God's commandments, to please God. We have to keep His commandments. That's how we worship God. That's where we serve God. Now, it does tell us that when we're ready to establish a king, we shall establish one that God chooses. Right? So this idea of a king got twisted into some celestial butler, some guy coming in the clouds. I'm sorry?
You just said God twisted, and I think you meant Christians twisted.
I said got. I'm sorry. Got twisted.
I thought you said God.
Yeah.
I was about to say, well, let me correct them.
So they ran with a scenario that's outside the Torah of some redemptive king liberating Israel, because that's what Israel was expecting during the Roman occupation, someone to liberate them, which is why they initially chose Bar Kokhba, right? Some big military leader, right? But this is not what the Torah tells us. It doesn't even speak about a perpetual age of peace or anything like that. It basically says that there's a formula.
I think Ezekiel does speak about a perpetual.
Right, but Ezekiel's not the Torah, first of all. And Ezekiel doesn't speak of a perpetual age of peace.
Right.
But the word le'olam doesn't mean forever. It just means for a long time. The notion of eternity really doesn't exist in the Bible. The Almighty, in the end of Deuteronomy and the end of Leviticus, lays down a formula for exile and redemption. In other words, disobedience to God equals exile.
From 28 to the end of the book.
Absolutely. So nowhere there does it speak about a perpetual anything, an age of some messiahship that's never going to end. It seems like it's circular in nature. Right, well, in Torah, the Torah is the basis. The rabbis themselves are the ones who wrote and compiled the books of the prophets to bring us back to Torah and to give us a historical account of how God reacts to disobedience.
I'd have to disagree with the rabbis compiled that. I think it was, unless we want to redefine the word rabbis.
Well, judges.
Yeah, the judges, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So, being that no one, not even a prophet, is allowed to add or take away from the Torah, how can judges just decide that these books are holy and kind of in some way attach them to the end of Deuteronomy?
No, I agree. So what you're saying is, how do we determine which book of the prophets is genuinely a book of the prophits?
No, the job of the prophet is not to speak to future generations of impending doom.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that it has any book that's going to be a book that it's going to be canonized as a book of a prophet. The first thing it has to do is line up. The first thing it has to do is line up with Torah. It has
so your interpretations of the prophets do not align with Torah. You just said that the Torah does not speak about a perpetual age at all.
No, you said it. I didn't.
Said that you were familiar with the end of Deuteronomy, and there's a formula there for exile and redemption.
I've read it many times.
Okay.
And, even to the point when you read Deuteronomy, there's only one time that the Jewish people were actually, after they came out of Egypt, that they were actually loaded up in boats and sent back to Egypt, and no one would buy them. And that was I believe it was after the Bar Kokhba thing.
Right, Josephus speaks about that, but that's not a prophecy.
Yeah, I know.
That's part of a formula.
I know Josephus also speaks about it, and but that right there, is that a fulfillment of prophecy? It's
not a
never
prophecy.
happened before.
That's not a prophecy.
So is it or isn't it? God said
it's not a prophecy. No, he didn't say that. Hold on, He's given examples of what's going to happen when you disobey my words. That you're going to be exiled, you're going to be mistreated by the nations. Not that this has to happen, but he says this is what will happen when you disobey my words. And clearly we're not perfect.
And it happened.
Right. Yeah, but it's not a prophecy. It's part of a formula. In other words...
yeah, but and it happened. So the idea to just dismiss it that it's not a prophecy, I just wouldn't go there. You know, just
you can't say it's a prophecy and it's conditional. In other words, if God says this is going to happen, but that means it's not conditional. If he's just reiterating prior principles that if you disobey, I'm going to bring calamity on you, that's not a prophecy. He's explaining what's going to happen when you disobey.
I think if you read that spot in Deuteronomy again, you'll find out that he's saying this is what's going to happen, not if.
Oh no! I mean, I've read it many times.
Yeah, I have too. You know,
it's equivalent to telling your child that if you stay out late, you're going to be grounded. So the kid stays out late, you ground him. You're not going to call that a prophecy. I mean, you're going to say, I laid down a formula.
I laid down a formula, and it's been fulfilled.
Right. You know, but it's not fulfilled.
But
it happened.
I mean, that's equivalent. That's equivalent on what prophecy is, I guess. I mean,
no. Well, it's because it can happen over and over again.
I look at it when I read that. I've read it many times, and he says, if you keep my laws, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to prosper you. This, and this. If you don't, this and this is going to happen. And then it goes into almost like a monologue, I guess you'd say, or a diatribe. And then it speaks about Israel being taken again back to Egypt in boats, put on the auction block, and no one will even buy you. And then it happened. And it happened because they didn't listen to the voice of God, and it happened in 72.
And it could happen again. I mean, Egypt is our neighbor to the south.
I hope it doesn't happen again. But you know what? It did happen, and it happened in 70 AD. So now you have to ask. You had your Pharisees and the people that were making the halakha at the time. They were put on boats. They were taken to Egypt. They were put on the auction blocks, and no one even wanted to buy them, you know, because they didn't want a Jew in their house, because everyone was thinking such bad things about Jewish people that you don't even bring them into your house. They couldn't even sell them, you know. So, and it says because you didn't obey my voice, that's going to happen, and it did happen. So, and we know it did happen. So, what is the voice that they didn't obey? It wasn't the Pharisee doctrine.
This was not their first exile, by the way.
Huh?
This is not the first Jewish exile. In other words, this was just a formula being played out for the third time. The first time was with the 10 lost tribes.
I know that you're saying that, but I think this is that was the only time. That was the only time.
Okay. But the Torah never talks about only times. You know, it seems like it's circular in nature. This is going to happen over and over again. You know, it says when.
I mean, we haven't seen it, right? I mean, I understand your argument and why you have it, but the fact is, it did happen exactly as it said it was going to happen. You know, and it says because they didn't obey the voice. So what's the voice that they didn't obey in 72 AD that caused that? What's the voice that they didn't obey?
Mainly the voice of Moses, because that's the only reason God told you. God lays down in Torah that he's going to punish Israel for not keeping his commandments. So then we have to assume that if they get exiled is just for that, for not keeping his commandments.
Well, that's exactly what Jesus said about. That's exactly what Jesus said about him. It said, "You guys."
So we don't need Jesus to tell us this. We know.
Obviously, someone did because you guys, you know, I mean, at the time, I mean, you read in Matthew chapter 6, I believe it is, or 5. No, I think it's 6. After Jesus tells everyone, "Think not that I have come to destroy the laws of the prophets. I haven't come to destroy them, but I've come to refill them," is his words. I've come to restore them back to where they were. And he said, and then he goes on to say that, therefore, whosoever breaks the least of these commandments and teaches men to do so shall be called despicable in heaven. I mean, it says least in most Bibles, but when you really look up the word, it means the lowest of the low.
I mean, I'm not saying that Jesus was against people keeping commandments. I'm just saying that he's not necessary. But we could all come to this conclusion by studying Torah. Good.
Yeah. Okay. Then after that, he says, I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll no way you're going to enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, you and I both know that studying Torah. Hey, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. I was getting an echo. That your righteousness is determined by how you keep the law. I mean, that's what God teaches in Torah. That
I'm not disagreeing with you that Jesus kept Torah.
Well, let's just stay on this for a second. That we at least agree that God describes our righteousness in comparison to how we keep the Torah. I mean, that's what he says. And then he goes on to say, unless your righteousness will exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, there's no way you're going to enter the kingdom of heaven. So what he's really saying, unless your compliance of Torah exceeds the compliance of the scribes and Pharisees, you're not going to get into heaven. And so this is how austere that Jesus was about keeping Torah. And then he goes on, and it goes immediately on that, and 5 times in a row, maybe it's even 7 times in a row, he goes on and says, you have heard it said. He never says you have, he never says you have seen it written. He says, you have heard it said, hate thy enemy, and then Jesus says, love thy enemy, then he says, but I say unto you, love thy enemy. And it goes right on there.
All I'm saying is that we don't need Jesus for any of this stuff. Torah mentions this already. I don't understand. It tells us to keep commandments in Torah. Why do we need Jesus, who ultimately got the vast majority of followers who exist today, his followers who exist today, not to keep Torah? For whatever reason, that may have not been his intent, but if someone follows your teachings...
Let's talk about that.
If someone follows your teachings, well, they would have to move on your block and only study with you in order to be validated by God. Do you know how absurd that sounds?
I don't think they'd have to move on to my block to do that, because it's a very simple thing. I'd say to them, do your very best with all your heart, mind, and soul, with all your conscience, to obey the laws of Moses. And I think that you will find. I mean, when I say obey heart, mind, and soul, not just literally taking it, but looking for the spiritual meaning, because there's a spiritual meaning behind everything in the Torah. At least I believe there is. I mean, it even says that the tzitzits that we wear, are supposed to be made, out of 4 white threads and 1 blue thread, and it represents the 5 books of Moses.
All right, so we'll continue this conversation at a different time. I think this is enough to get people asking questions, and continue this conversation at a different time. I think this is enough to get